What is the state of the United States right now for the working class and the middle class in 2021? Fear, confusion, despair, anger, uncertainty, distrust, alienation, insecurity, pain, hatred, division. The United States for working people and the lower strata of the petty bourgeois finds itself in a hyper-polarized culture war as the economic lifeblood gets sucked out of our people to make the ultra-bourgeois rich. Before I discuss the question of left patriotism, we need to examine and discuss the recent political and economic history of the United States, and I will begin with the so-called right wing. Half of the population looks to the past for answers. They look wistfully at a more prosperous, Christian, secure, but far more racially and sexually exclusive era, which under present social and economic conditions will never re-materialize. They will never get to enjoy the post-war 1950s high that their parents and grandparents enjoyed. Eisenhower's America is dead. And now, the decaying labor aristocracy built during the 1950s and 1960s is experiencing economic withdrawal that came in the form of a short-term crack high that Reaganite privatization policies, more or less kept in place for the past 40 years, did not lead to sustainable growth for the lower strata of the petty bourgeois. The factories, industrial centers, and mom-and-pop stores that built the labor aristocracy were outsourced overseas and replaced with government-subsidized big-box stores filled with low-cost consumables. That's how households can afford 3 television sets, Jason Unruhe, because they're all cheap. That's why. Shopping malls filled with consumables that were also additionally cheap to produce, but expensive to purchase. Name brand high-end stores like Saks Fifth Avenue, Prada, Apple, of the sorts, complete with low-wage jobs for teenagers and retired adults to fill. The economy financialized itself, so the labor aristocracy had to break the bank and either send themselves off to school or send their kids off to school, college I mean, so they could get degrees to move into the city where they could work in tech and financial positions to remain economically relevant. The alternative for those who could not pay for school was economic conscription. Kids went off to join the military or the police to protect the wealth and assets of the finance, insurance, and real estate industries, fire industries as we call them, which created the suburbs and secure wealth for the oil lobby that was fueling the engine of middle America, which by the manipulation of fire industries and the oil lobby was most certainly indeed built on structural racism and imperialism. Bill Clinton comes into office in the 1990s, signs off on NAFTA, which if Bush Sr. had a second term, he would have done the same exact thing, liberalizing the economy and decimating the industrial capacity during the dawn of the internet age, not to mention eliminating welfare as we know it, and replaced it with work-to-eat programs, something to that extent. Then after Clinton, W comes into office, the son of Mr. CIA himself, and what a coincidence. The originally CIA-backed Al-Qaeda attacks the World Trade Center. The United States is going to war with the terrorists who hate freedom. Hoorah! Vengeance is ours. Hoorah! Freedom, baby! Yeah, freedom. After 20 years of freedom that cost a cumulatively $8 trillion, most of which went to very wealthy American and European shareholders who hold stock in companies relative to private defense contractors and military contracting, a freedom that cost over 1 million lives on both sides, reduced civil liberties, and implemented endless surveillance. A war on terror that was not merely a go-get bin Laden in Afghanistan job, but a war that also expanded to Iraq, to benefit the oil lobby, Exxon, British Petroleum, Shell. The 2008 subprime mortgage crisis happens, Wall Street goes into meltdown, and a socialist savior is needed to fix America. Turns out that socialist savior, LOL, is Barack Obama, who passes the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, giving Wall Street a second and larger bailout than TARP, and who creates a subsidized government program to benefit American and European shareholders of private insurance companies in the form of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. The right is pissed. They think Obama is a socialist and are starting to think that Bush was also a socialist. Try to figure that one out. They formed the Tea Party and run libertarian whack jobs who argue for lower taxes and to make the free market even freer from corporate America that is becoming globalist. Sad, confused people they are. What more, the Obama State Department ran by Hillary Clinton? Yeah, sure. It ended combat operations in Iraq, sure, but coordinated with the CIA to launch a color revolution in northeastern Africa to destabilize the region. And in the midst of this destabilization, resource-rich Libya was taken over by the United States, and Al-Qaeda, who the U.S. is still at war with because of 9/11, allegedly. Yemen got bombed, Somalia got bombed, and the contagion of the Arab Spring would spread to Syria, which is also resource-rich. The war on terror was all about the Western oil lobby, both American and British, monopolizing the resources of the Middle East for profit, and at the expense of the labor aristocracy, which enthusiastically supported the war on terror in the early days of 9/11, but realizing that no post-war high was coming, in 2016, they put Trump into office, believing that he was going to solve all the problems that presented themselves when he was only in office for the sake of his own ego and for business branding purposes. Today, these sad and confused people blame communism, they blame China, they blame critical race theory, immigration, and in extreme cases, even in anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. They will blame everything under the sun except for the very economic system that they defend, which to them is associated with the American flag they wave, America, which to them is a statement against liberalism and communism, but forgetting its original meaning. On the other side of the political sphere, you got the liberal left, the antithesis of homogenous, Christianized, masculized middle America, and all-class alliance. James Connolly warned about all-class alliances, by the way, whose philosophical leadership comes from an extremely tone-deaf entertainment industry, academia, and Silicon Valley, which in the early 2000s did denounce Bush for all the evil that his administration did, only to rehabilitate him 20 years later because he was more respectable than the vulgar Donald Trump, who prevented their champion and savior, Hillary Clinton, from assuming the presidency, blaming a Russia-Trump alliance all day, every day, 24/7. These institutions went into overdrive, co-opting what were originally grassroots social justice movements to unleash their infinite rage and fury in the form of a 4-year color revolution to punish the sad and backward racist people who wave the American flag, who mindlessly support the police, who do murder BIPOCs as a means to pressure non-white communities out of cities and towns for professional class liberals to gentrify at the behest of the real estate industry, by the way. And in doing so, integrated social justice into neoliberalism, creating a class of professional activists who profit from waging endless cultural revolution on middle America, policing language, removing outdated sports logos, which they don't even watch sports, to tell you the truth, remaking classic movies to fit a social justice narrative, instead of making new movies with new ideas, making advertisements more inclusive, ripping down offensive statues, redefining gender, co-opting indigenous peoples' sovereignty struggles to decolonize white supremacist culture, but not eliminate private property, by the way. Then in 2020, coincidentally, a re-election year, a pandemic happens, and these folks go overboard. They shut down every economic venture. 40 million people lose their jobs. 200,000 small businesses are shut down. At least businesses that are not named Walmart or Amazon or related to the tech industry. The 1% earned some $4 trillion in 2020 alone because of these economic measures or health measures used to protect the economy. All social activity is done virtually, enabling for Silicon Valley to collect more data. They vocally want to regulate every waking moment and every thought you have. They push for mandatory vaccination in a country that is big pharma hesitant. And what do you know? Big pharma made a lot of money off of this anyway. Of course they did. Vaccine passports. And they tell you not to question them or the United Nations and the World Health Organization, and tell you that despite the long history of electoral corruption within urban Democratic Party machines, see Tammany Hall, folks, that there was no corruption whatsoever in the 2020 election, which was done almost exclusively by mail-in ballot on the behalf of the Democratic Party. Okay. People who fall into this side of the spectrum attribute Trump's election due to the long history of the United States being a racist, sexist, toxic, masculine, colonial settler country built on slavery, indigenous genocide, and oppression, all to benefit the European labor aristocracy that resorted to their reactionary tendencies to prop up Trump into office. And that's why the American flag is a symbol to be destroyed, and the United States is to be decolonized and integrated into a borderless community whose market is still run by Wall Street and Anglophiles and wealthy Europeans. These are very deep philosophical divides indeed. Everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else. Meanwhile, as public infrastructure crumbles, millions of people get evicted from their homes, millions more die from poverty-linked illnesses, malnutrition, lack of affordable health care, frostbite and heat stroke. Mental illness is pervasive, overdoses, suicides, mass shootings. Half-empty luxury developments pop up in every big city, half filled with oblivious and stupefied petty bourgeois transient yuppies, both politically liberal and conservative. The other half is filled with the laundered blood money of foreign oil barons and financial oligarchs, inflating real estate costs and driving uncounted millions of people onto the streets to live in their cars or in tents. A person making minimum wage needs to work 2.5 jobs to barely afford rent in every state. The working class and the lower strata of the petty bourgeois are taxed too much, with that money not being reinvested in the public. The public is divided on the pandemic, which keeps proliferating its existence, and there are indeed very constitutionally questionable health measures that are being implemented and which people should very well question and not blindly go along with it. All in the while nobody's looking, American multi-millionaires and billionaires are engaged in the practice of shadow banking, which is at least a $52 trillion industry. At least. And let me say that again. $52 trillion. Stashing their unpaid taxes away into offshore accounts that are linked to the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Cyprus, Bermuda, and the City of London, in addition to Switzerland and the Vatican. We can't forget about them either. Folks, this may be uncomfortable for you to hear, but please think about this. American billionaires get around paying taxes to the American public by having that money laundered into offshore banking accounts that are under the jurisdiction of the British Crown. This isn't some crazy Lyndon LaRouche conspiracy. This is actually happening. And we need to ask, how long has this been going on for? While it is true that the 50-star United States flag for many symbolizes genocide, slavery, colonial settlerism, especially for overseas territories that should all be given back to those peoples, and as you know, I am very adamant about that. The federal government has always worked for the interests of the Anglophile bourgeoisie, who have historically inflamed the passions of the white proletariat to fight and die for the wars of the capitalist for private capital to profit. The United States government does not represent the collective interests of the American people, who are not racially homogenous or culturally homogenous either. The decaying European labor aristocracy in the lower strata of the petty bourgeois needs to get over their little hard-on for the 1950s and understand that. And the radical liberals who side with the ultra-Anglophile bourgeois, who have adopted cultural liberalism and who are stealing from you, need to understand that as well. As the right sees the American flag as a statement against communism, and the left sees the American flag as a statement justifying white supremacy, both of you have seemed to forget the original purpose of the 13th star American flag, and that was a statement telling England their divine right theory, which still applies to the current monarch, who is above the law and legal prosecution, just as George III was, and the British Crown too, fuck off. And right now, in 2021, the British Crown, legally the largest landowner in the world, is providing legal immunity and profiting from our billionaires who are laundering their unpaid tax dollars into banking accounts under their jurisdiction. So you know what? I'm going to put down the 50-star flag and wave the 13-star Betsy Ross instead, because I want our money back. I want our money back to fund our schools, our hospitals, to make sure that everyone is fed, to make sure that the descendants of the enslaved get their reparations, to make sure that Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico get their independence and their reparations, to make sure that every tent city is replaced with a house with the resources required for comfortable living, to see to it that every poor and oppressed person under capitalism and neo-feudalism is no longer poor and oppressed. I believe in the American Revolution that Thomas Paine believed in, that monarchy and aristocracy should be overthrown. I believe in the working class Irish Revolution that James Connolly believed in, that monarchy and aristocracy should be overthrown. I believe in the Russian Revolution that Lenin believed in, which did overthrow the monarchy and the aristocracy. This is what I term to be left wing patriotism. Left wing patriotism is not to be confused with bourgeois nationalism, which emphasizes cultural and militaristic hegemony to benefit ultra-exclusive cliques of private capital under the banner of a flag. I do not believe in the 50-star United States of Wall Street flag that has terrorized the indigenous enslaved Africans, and that of which has invaded and occupied the Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Vietnam, Iraq, and many other places to benefit private capital. I believe in the 13th-star People's Republic of the United States, with its empire reduced to its original borders, with land in the other 37 states repatriated back to the indigenous peoples of those lands, and to the descendants of the enslaved, and back to Mexico, which serves the interests of its culturally heterogeneous working people, and which stands to defy and overthrow the tyrannical reign of robber barons, aristocrats, tech oligarchs, financiers, and monarchs, which provides aid and comfort to all people fighting colonialism and capitalist oppression, and which engages in fair and peaceful trade with Mexico, the People's Republic of Canada, the Indigenous Confederation, New Africa, and the Hawaiian Kingdom. However, until that becomes possible, the only way forward, despite our sharp cultural divisions, is to go back to the beginning and rewrite history and finish what should have been finished. It is our patriotic duty to inform our fellow citizenry, whether we agree with them or not, on cultural issues, about what is happening relevant to the issue of our capital being leached by parasitic Anglophiles, to build a mass line, local organizations, and assume political power, and then to wage struggle and get the people's stolen capital repatriated back to the United States, in addition to getting the people's stolen capital repatriated back to every person who was robbed by American and British imperialism. After the struggle has been won, then we will go about the business of peacefully resolving cultural disputes and divisions. When I say down with the crown, I do not say that as an empty slogan. I mean it. Down with the monarchy, their apologists, their agents, their insidious institutions, and their monopolies. Down with the aristocracy, down with the crown. When that happens, the United States will make its first critical steps to amend for its sins of the past, and the world will be better off. Let's get to work, comrades. Down with the crown. This is Comrade Pella, signing out.